Did you know that the Bluetooth technology in your pocket right now is named after a 10th century Viking king who united tribes just like technology unites devices today? Or that these Scandinavian explorers landed in North America, specifically Canada, centuries before Christopher Columbus was even born? But here is the biggest shocker. Viking wasn't a race, and it wasn't a specific empire. In your culture, the word Viking was actually a verb, a job description that meant to go raiding or pirating. Most of these people were actually simple farmers or fishermen who went on these expeditions to gather resources. So who were they really? Savage barbarians or misunderstood explorers? To understand how they went from local farmers to the rulers of the seas, we must go back to the year 793 AD and the freezing lands of Scandinavia, where the age of Vikings truly began. But a natural question arises. Why would these people living in Scandinavia suddenly decide to go out and loot the world? The answer lies in three specific reasons. First, it was about survival. Scandinavia is an incredibly cold region, and as their families grew, they realized the freezing land simply couldn't produce enough food to sustain the population. To feed their families, they had to raid. Second, it was about competition. At that time, there was no single central government or king. Instead, people lived in small groups led by local chieftains. These leaders were in a constant contest to prove who was the strongest, and leading raids was the best way to boost their status. And finally, it was about envy and technology. When European ships passed through Scandinavian waters, the Vikings saw superior technology and unique goods. They realized that if they attacked, they could steal not just the wealth, but the secrets of that technology for themselves. The turning point that launched the true age of Vikings occurred in the year 793 AD on the eastern coast of England at a small island called Lindisfarne. The target was a monastery, a religious site filled with treasure but guarded only by peaceful monks. The Vikings attacked, caused massive destruction, looted everything they could find, and fled back to their ships before anyone could stop them. The locals were horrified, not just by the violence, but because they believed no one would dare attack a house of God. However, the Vikings were not Christians. To them, a monastery wasn't a holy sanctuary, it was simply a building with no guards and a lot of gold. Because they attacked these sacred places without hesitation, the Europeans branded them as barbarians and savages. From that year onwards, and specifically after 799 AD, they perfected a hit-and-run tactic, attacking fast, looting, and vanishing before any army could respond. For decades, the Vikings used hit-and-run tactics, attacking fast and vanishing. But soon, they noticed that the political situation in Europe was unstable. In 840 AD, when the king of the Frankish Empire, modern-day France and Germany, died, his son Lothair actually hired Vikings to help him defeat his own brothers in a civil war. This was a revelation for the Vikings. They realized that European kings were willing to pay them. This started a massive extortion racket, a medieval form of datagiri, bullying, where Vikings would demand payment from kings just to stop raiding their towns. By the mid-9th century, they stopped running away and started settling down, building trading towns in Ireland like Dublin and Limerick. But the biggest deal happened in 911 AD. The French king gave a massive piece of land to a Viking leader named Rollo on one condition, that he protect France from other raiders. This land became known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. And if that name sounds familiar, it is the exact same location where Allied forces landed for Operation Overlord in World War II in 1944. While the Vikings were busy raiding Northern Europe, they also turned their ships toward the west. In the 9th century, they reached Iceland and established a new community there. Among them was a man named Eric the Red, a Viking so violent and dangerous, even by their standards, that he was punished and exiled from Iceland. Forced to leave, he sailed further west and founded a new settlement in Greenland, becoming its king. But the journey didn't end there. Eric's children, a son named Leif Erikson and a daughter named Freydis, sailed even further into the unknown. They landed in a place they called Newfoundland, which is in modern-day Canada. This means the Vikings reached the North American continent centuries before Christopher Columbus or the Spanish explorers ever arrived. However, they failed to establish a permanent colony in America. The reason? It is said that Freydis had a terrible temper. When they landed in Newfoundland, she was denied a specific house she wanted, and her ensuing rage caused such internal conflict that the Vikings were forced to abandon the New World. The Age of Vikings entered a second, much different phase in the middle of the 10th century. They were no longer small, decentralized gangs of raiders. They had become a unified empire led by royal kings. This transformation began with a king of Denmark named Harald Bluetooth, who united the scattered tribes and converted the entire population to Christianity. In fact, the Bluetooth technology we use in our phones today is named directly after him, because just as he connected different tribes, the technology connects different devices. With this new unity came massive, organized warfare. King Bluetooth's son Sweyn Forkbeard gathered a professional army and actually conquered England in 1013, defeating the English king. Following Sweyn's death, his son Canute took control, ruling a massive North Sea empire that included Denmark, Norway, and Britain. However, this dominance was temporary. By 1042, Canute's successors had died, allowing the exiled English heir, Edward the Confessor, to return and reclaim the throne, pushing the Scandinavians out of power in England. For the moment. The final chapter of the Viking Age was written in the bloodiest year of them all, 1066. After the English king Edward passed away, the throne went to Harald Godwinson, but he was immediately sandwiched between two massive invasions. From the north, a legendary Viking king named Harald Hardrada attacked the area of York. Godwinson marched his army north and, in a stunning victory, actually defeated the Viking forces. But the celebration was short-lived. Immediately after, from the south, the Duke of Normandy, William, launched an invasion at a place called Hastings. In the famous Battle of Hastings in 1066, Godwinson was killed, and William the Conqueror became the King of England. Historians mark this specific year as the end of the Age of Vikings. But here's the irony. William was a Norman, which means he was a descendant of the Vikings who had settled in France years earlier. So while the era of small, disorganized raiding parties, the OG Vikings, was over, the people themselves didn't vanish. They had simply evolved from pirates into the rulers of organized empires like Denmark, Norway, and England. So, strictly speaking, the era of the OG Vikings, the small independent raiding parties, had ended. They were no longer pirates, they were now citizens of the separate organized empires of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, but their influence didn't disappear. We still use their names today, like King Bluetooth connecting our phones. If you want to dive deeper into this history, I highly recommend the book The Age of the Vikings. Or if you want to see the dramatic story of their journey to North America, check out the anime Vinland Saga. This video was just a summary of their 250-year reign, but the real secret to their success was actually their engineering. Why were their ships so fast and strong? I will be breaking down the science of Viking longships in a separate video soon, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it.